Now, welcome to another edition of Let's Talk Some Star Wars, where we're still rating and ranking the best arcs from the Clone Wars animated series. And this time we'll be taking a look at the results of the poll for the Yoda/Force arc from the end of Season 6. I'll then be reading and responding to some of your comments, as well as showing off some of the artwork that's been sent in to me lately. But before all that, you can of course already nominate and or vote for which arc we do next. Just head down and respond to my pinned comment below with a suggestion, or vote with a thumbs up if the one you'd like to see is already there. Whichever comment gets the most votes in the next 24 hours or so will be the winner and the one we do next. Alright, and now let's take a look at the results for this poll, where we'll see that 31% of voters gave this arc 5 stars and thought it was amazing, 57% then gave it 4 stars and thought it was good, 10% of voters thought it was about average and gave it 3 stars, which left 1% to give it 2, and a final 1% to give it just 1 star. And so when we do all the math here, the Yoda Force arc ends up with an average score of 4.16, which puts it into 8th place overall currently, which is a bit lower than I saw this one finishing, though I might be a bit biased here because this is one of my favorite arcs of the whole show. I do love when they delve into or deal with anything involving the Force, which this arc obviously did in a very big way. Anyway, let's now just move on to your comments. But first, as always, a big thank you to everyone who votes, comments, sends in artwork, and watches the videos. Oh, and just a reminder to anyone who wants to send in something, please do send it to the email address in the description below. And if you'd like to be recognized for your work or to send someone to a site they can find more of your work, do include your name and or any links right on the image. All that said, let's now start, as we always do, with the top-rated comment, which this time came to us from Jessica A, who said, "A solid lore-building arc that explains a lot about the Force ghosts and the trials to become one. It's cool to get more from Qui-Gon even as a disembodied voice. Him being the first prequel-era Jedi in canon to preserve his identity after death supports him being the truest Jedi of that time, while the rest had lost sight of their purpose. There were some great moments in this arc, like Yoda facing his gremlin alter ego and his visions of the future. Darth Bane's appearance was awesome to rewatch after reading the book trilogy. Still, like Mortis, it can't contend with arcs like Siege of Mandalore, Umbara, and Shadow Collective for me. It's definitely in my top 10, but not in my top 5. 4 stars from me." And yeah, one thing I do absolutely love about this arc is that it reiterates just how great of a Jedi Qui-Gon Jinn really was. That he was the only one on the right path while all the other Jedi, or at least most of the other Jedi, had lost their way. I mean, there's a reason why Qui-Gon originally found Anakin and why, I believe, he was meant to train Anakin until that little incident with Darth Maul happened. And that's because he was one of the few Jedi still listening to and following the will of the Force, as they all should be. And no disrespect intended towards Obi-Wan Kenobi, who turned out to be a great Jedi obviously, but he simply wasn't ready to train Anakin when he did. And if Qui-Gon had trained him, I think a great many things change. And hopefully tomorrow I'll finally have my video about that, about how everything changes if Qui-Gon trains Anakin, finally done and up after talking about doing it for quite some time now. Oh, and going along with the second half of your comment, we also have this one from Max D, who said, "As someone who is way more into the quote-unquote war part of the Clone Wars and a little less interested in the mythology of the Force, I didn't like this arc as much as some of the other arcs covered in this series. That said, it was really cool to see a character like Yoda so vulnerable and out of his element. There are even aspects of the Force that he doesn't even fully understand yet, and to see him go through that and be humbled and learn was an excellent bit of character development. That's one of the biggest reasons I love this show as a whole, seeing characters we know and love do things we don't really expect them to do. For this arc, 4 stars for me." And there were many people in the comments this week that said something similar to this, about how they're more into the war aspect of the series, which is fine and certainly understandable, but that they still enjoyed this arc despite that, though not as much as some of the other ones. And I also agree this showed us a different, more vulnerable side of Yoda. It showed us that much to learn he still has. Which brings us to this comment from Rivera, who said, "I really liked how helpless Yoda felt in this arc, and that even though he thought he had nothing more to learn, his knowledge was seriously lacking in this department, showing that even Yoda had struggles and fears deepened his character immensely. Honestly, a great arc." We also had this comment from CJ, who said, "Aside from the Siege of Mandalore arc, this is my absolute favorite arc in the Clone Wars. This arc does an exceptional job of explaining Yoda's journey from the flawed Jedi sitting atop a bureaucratic and decaying order to the wise and sagely master we know in the original trilogy. This is a fine example of how the Clone Wars helped bridge the gap that existed between the prequels and originals, plus it canonizes Darth Bane, so that's cool. But perhaps more importantly, this arc does a better job of explaining what balance in the Force truly means than any of the saga films ever did. Not only did Yoda learn to vanquish the dark side version of himself, thereby conquering the dark within him, the arc serves to show us the loss that Yoda has to endure if he is to find victory for all times. We learn that the Force is a balance of life and death that constantly feeds each other, but when we give in to our selfish motivations, even if for the purest intentions, our actions corrupt that balance. Only by controlling our darker base emotions and being mindful of our feelings rather than acting on them can the balance within us be achieved, much like in the galaxy as a whole. This is an easy 5 stars for me. Control over me you have not. Through patience and training, it is I who control you. Very well said, and this arc helps make clear many things or sayings that we hear throughout the saga that otherwise never really get explained, like be mindful of your feelings, for example, which means don't deny you have them, just be aware of what they are, and don't act rashly based off of them. Don't let your feelings and emotions control you, have control over them, as Yoda basically says. And along these lines, I think a lot of people are wrongly under the impression that Jedi try to deny that they have feelings and or emotions at all. And don't get me wrong, some prequel era Jedi do seem to want to deny it or act like they do have them, but they're instead essential to a Jedi's very existence, which is basically what Anakin tells Padme in Episode 2, that Jedi are encouraged to love and be compassionate towards all, but the key word there is all. They're not supposed to love or place precedence on certain individuals over others. Sure, they can have friends and all of that. The Master-Padawan bond is obviously a very close and intimate personal relationship as well, but they have to ever be mindful of those feelings towards each other and make sure they never become true attachments where they need that other person, or a possessive type relationship where they feel some sort of responsibility for another person, or like they're prioritizing them over others. Because as odd or as bad as it may sound, it is a type of selfishness to care about a certain person over others. And yeah, for normal, non-Force sensitive people, that's fine to have those type of relationships. Pretty much all of us here in the real world live our lives forming those type of bonds with others all the time, and it doesn't mean we don't care about other people or anything like that. It also doesn't mean a Jedi who might indeed form a relationship like that wouldn't care about others either, or that somehow couldn't handle it. But then again, we in the real world will never be put in a position like Anakin Skywalker was, where he can either save a Sith Lord and potentially save his wife, or he can let them be killed, thus ending the threat of the Sith to the galaxy potentially forever, but maybe losing his wife in the process. And if Anakin didn't care about Padme's life more than others, he would have let Windu kill Palpatine, and a lot of pain and suffering would have been avoided. It may sound very harsh, but it all boils down to a Jedi always needing to put the greater good above all else, and especially their own personal desires. Anyway, that was a rather long ramble, so let's now move on to this comment from Brandon Barr, who said, "I've been waiting for this one to come around. It's one of my favorite arcs of the entire series, and before Season 7, I felt it was a fitting end. I get that a lot of people don't like when the Force is explained, but I love the lore expansion from this series, and specifically explanations regarding the inner workings of the Force. I've never been a midi-chlorian hater either. 5 stars. We also then had this comment from Pam Arth, who said, "One thing I picked up on during the rewatch was how much foreshadowing there was for Yoda training Luke and him carrying on the light. Thanks sequels for ruining that. Another thing I really like about this episode was how it essentially explained the Force without explaining it. What I mean by that is that it still explains some parts of the Force, but it still keeps the Force feeling mysterious. I loved hearing Yoda's theme many times too. The last thing I felt after rewatching was how ominous it was to know as the audience what happens later on. I think this arc will probably score in the top few arcs. I gave it 5 stars, but I still wouldn't say that it is the best arc. I think it is great that there are multiple arcs that I would consider 5 stars in the Clone Wars. Thanks for giving me a reason to rewatch Thor." We also then had this comment from King Nothing, who said, "I loved how it went into the Force. I don't feel the story demystified it. My biggest qualm is that Yoda gets a vision of Order 66 and does nothing about it. Whether he felt he could or not, he didn't even try. But aside from that, it was amazing. Getting Mark Hamill to voice Darth Bane was a great touch. Yoda facing the darkness within him, incorporating Qui-Gon into it like he was supposed to be in Revenge of the Sith. The Force Priestess, I loved it." And yeah, as I said, I very much enjoyed this arc as well, and I personally always am a fan of learning more about the Force, though I do realize that the more it gets explained, the more you run into the risk of demystifying it and, in a way, making it less interesting or at least less intriguing. I mean, part of the reason a lot of people hated midichlorians is that they thought it both explained and quantified the Force. They thought it meant the Force was generated by these little creatures in your cells, and however many of them you had determined your potential, that they were basically like a power meter. Thankfully though, they're nothing like that at all. Instead, and we mainly learn in this arc, that they just basically act as a conduit between the living and cosmic force. And as Qui-Gon says in The Phantom Menace, when you quiet your mind, you can hear them telling you the will of the Force. And no, I don't think that means they literally speak to you and tell you the will of the Force. I think it's more about trusting your instincts more than anything else. And as for Yoda basically learning about Order 66 and that they were going to lose to the dark side and not really trying to do anything about it, that's probably the oddest, most confusing part of this whole arc. The only thing I can think is that they wanted to show some sort of parallel here, where Yoda admits there is darkness within him and accepts it and hence in a way defeats it, while at the same time acknowledging and accepting that the dark side is going to win this war and rule for the time being. But if he accepts that and is patient, the good side will prevail in the end. Not saying that's a great explanation, but that's about all I've got. And speaking of all I've got, let me now read off a few final comments here, minus my commentary, because I think I rambled enough in this one, but the nature of the Force, the meaning behind it, and all of that is something I can talk about pretty much forever. Anyway, let's now get to this comment from 2nd Airborne Productions, who said, "An absolutely beautiful and mysterious arc showing the fears and insecurities of Yoda, while also showing how amazing and powerful he is. Magnificently animated, wonderfully scored, and overall incredibly interesting." Then this comment from Amit Avinoam, who said, "One of my favorite parts, showed us that even the old and wise Master Yoda still has much to learn, and he learned it from Qui-Gon, so that's a win." Also had this comment from Egirl Herald, who said, "My two favorite scenes were when Darth Bane comes back and when Yoda basically tells Anakin that he's an expert rule breaker." Also had this one from Energy Blast Productions, who said, "Pretty underrated arc. Hearing Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon again was amazing. What I love most about it is that Yoda is the one learning a bunch of stuff. Yoda is the one who has much still to learn about the Force, and it makes his journey in these episodes really interesting. The ending sort of works as an end to the Clone Wars before Season 7 came out, but in a very different way. Still sort of an ominous feeling since we know what's coming, but it ends with Yoda just as it started with Yoda in the first episode, Ambush." Then we also have this comment from Isaac, who said, "Pretty good, 5 stars. We learned how you become a Force ghost, how the Force works in the universe, that Yoda also has a dark side but accepts that it exists instead of pretending it does not, like most Jedi." Next, then, we have this comment from Untossed, who said, "This arc is our only glance into what George probably would have explored in his version of the sequels, and it's really interesting. I like the trials and how Jedi learn to become a Force ghost, and that it's Qui-Gon who discovers it. It explains that not all Jedi become Force ghosts. I wish JJ knew that or cared, but there's nothing we can change now. And Mark Hamill voiced Darth Bane. Do I have to say anything more? It's Mark Hamill." And finally here we have this comment from Fascist Gamer 651, who said, "I honestly thought it was a satisfying end to the Clone Wars. It sets up the events of Revenge of the Sith and even the original trilogy nicely. Plus we get a really cool dive into the Force and midichlorians. This arc proves that the more you know about the Force, the less you actually know." Agreed, I do think this did a great job of answering questions in a way that led to more questions, which is the way to do it when dealing with the mysterious nature of the Force, I feel. Always leave the audience wanting to know or understand more. It also is a great transition from prequel era Yoda to original trilogy era Yoda. We see that pivotal moment in his life where everything really starts to become truly clear to him. It also was a really simple yet fitting way to end the Clone Wars. Not that I don't think Season 7 and the Siege of Mandalore was better in pretty much all ways, but especially considering the show basically just got shut down and they had to make do, this still did manage to, once upon a time, give the show a very fitting end. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about the Yoda Force arc, or what I or anyone else had to say about it in this video. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.